After a long and arduous journey through the deep wilds, Kynan and Saskia have made it to Redcrest. Along the way, they've dealt with undead elemental guardian spirits, have discovered abandoned Ironlander villages that were befallen by strange disease and firstborn incursions, and last but not least, they have incurred a vow to find Asha, the daughter of the hermit Erin, who resides not too far away from where the dead village lies, and who has been outcast from Redcrest. And her daughter Asha, she fears, will suffer the consequences of associating with a mother that is not in the good graces of the Redcrest citizenry. So as much as they want to just continue on northward bound on their joint quest for revenge, Kynan and Saskia have to at least check in with Asha and make sure that she's safe. And of course, it's never going to be as simple as doing just that. Hey, how are ya? I'm Anderson and this is Kill 10 Rats Plays Ironsworn Chapter 2 Episode 4. We have reached Redcrest, and as far as it being simple to check in on Asha goes, we already know that our twist when failing the roll for our vow was that we are too late. What we don't really know is what that means. We also know a few things about Redcrest. A, they are dealing with the trouble nature strikes back, and B, somehow Erin has taken a part of the blame for these troubles arising. And we've also now discovered this theme of disease, of infection as an undercurrent of this story. So we're gonna work that in as well somehow. So this nature striking back, to my interpretation, is somehow also disease related. There is a parallel of sorts to what happened to the old village, except we don't really know what it was outside of the firstborn involvement and the ultimate downfall of the Ironlander settlement. So let's see if this is what happens to Redcrest 2. Let's see if we can save Asha. But first and foremost, let's determine a few things that will help us in answering all these questions. Like, what is the disease? How does it manifest? What is the nature striking back? And what is the actual situation in Redcrest? I think we have a few oracles that can help us here. Of course, we always have the standard action and theme oracles, but since we are dealing with another instance of a manifesting threat, even though it's not really a concurrent threat for our vow, it's sort of wrapped into it. So I'd like to have a look at the Delve oracles that deal with threat manifestation. And chief among those, we have two threats here that I think work well for our themes that we have going on. One is Malignant Plague, and the other is Rampaging Creature. So nature striking back, Rampaging Creature, that I think is a consistency, and the Malignant Plague, sickness, kind of speaks for itself. So let's give ourselves a few ideas on designing the situation that Kynan and Saskia now walk in as they reach Redcrest. Disease comes first. What is the implication of the disease? 65, which is force a horrible decision. So the disease has reached town and has forced a horrible decision. Okay, we can explore that a bit more once we know a bit more. What is the nature creature component here? Let's give ourselves a prompt. 97, threaten resources. Okay, that gives me a picture already with how we describe the location here, and also the burgeoning conflict that always is brewing between the Redcrestians and the firstborn of the Deep Wilds. I'm just not terribly sure about the disease yet, and I think the horrible decision needs a bit of fleshing out, as well as the disease itself. But let's go with the decision that was forced first. What action theme horrible decisions are we talking here? 03 weaken. 60 weakness. Weaken weakness. I don't think that really works. I will reroll this one because I don't like it. 80 health. Again, no huge surprise if we're talking about disease here that it's weakening health. I'm not sure about the horrible decision here. Let's look at the neighbors of 80 of health. Weaken revenge, weaken fellowship. Weaken fellowship I could work with, I think. But let's take it in sequence. So we have the nature strikes back as the main threat and the sickness, disease as a component of the main threat. And the main threat is threatening resources. We have established that Red Crest is on the outskirts of the deep wilds and that they are dependent on the deep wilds as well for resources. They are by a river. My gut, when I was thinking about the village, was also telling me that one point of conflict with the Firstborn in terms of Ironlanders settling near a forest is going to be wood as a natural resource. So the Ironlanders are going to be chopping down parts of the deep wilds, the outlying parts, but also driving back the forest bit by bit, year by year. And there will, of course, be some kind of line in the sand that the Firstborn draw, at which point they feel like a strike back is in order. I feel like this is where also a parallel is again possible to the old village, where I could see the point of contention being pretty much the same thing. So the resources or the tree clearing that was performed by the initial Ironlanders having brought on the ire of the Firstborn then, the same way that the encroaching lumber industry, the encroaching lumber harvesting that the Red Crestians are now doing, where they probably send some of the lumber that they don't need for their own uses to fortify and rebuild their village or expand their village, their town rather, into other Ironlander settlements further away from these deep wilds, and that this kind of specific lumber trade is one of the things that Red Crest is known for. So I think the nature strikes back, the threatened resource part is the lumber industry now being threatened by it no longer being safe for the Red Crestians to occupy their lumber camps. So I would imagine animal attacks, rampaging beasts, wolves, bears are all of a sudden coordinated, seemingly coordinated, preying on Red Crest townspeople that move into the forest for several days at a time to chop down some trees and send them towards the edge of the forest again. And maybe that's also how the disease part enters, because we know that the sickness we're describing now comes via the Firstborn, comes from the deep wilds, from the forest area. So perhaps the initial overlap between the sickness and the uprising of nature was the beasts that attacked the woodsmen of Red Crest, and the survivors that retreated towards Red Crest then found themselves infected, the ones that got attacked, and they spread the disease around inside the town itself. So they brought it with them from the lumber camps in the forest into the city of Red Crest, maybe even as an unintended consequence, maybe even as something that was not meant by the Firstborn to happen. So sequence of event I'm picturing is lumber camps are being attacked by rampaging beasts that are riled up beyond their natural instincts and are targeting specifically the Red Crestians in the forest, killing several, and the survivors, the wounded that make it back to Red Crest after a few days there start manifesting symptoms and have already then at that time during the incubation period infected several others of the people that were caring for them, thereby forcing a horrible decision which weakens fellowship, which in this case might mean that, well, have they cast them out maybe? Have they, once they find the infected, have they formed like a little leper colony outside of town? Let's ask the Oracle. Let's give it maybe a 50 plus, 51 plus chance of there being some kind of disease colony of the ones that Red Crest cast out of town. Maybe they even shut the gates now that they're not letting anyone in. 03, no, that is not what they've done. So they've probably pent them up inside the town. We've already seen that in the old village. Some of the houses were showing signs of being boarded shut from the outside, where the quote-unquote plague victims were, well, involuntarily quarantined by their fellow worthy constituents, so locked up in their homes. But they didn't kick them out. What did they do then? Well, besides locking them up in their houses, that's already a weakened fellowship kind of move, really, but it's more of a logical consequence of the disease anyway. Is there anything that goes beyond that I can think of? I guess in terms of a reaction to this outbreak, maybe they have also sealed off the town and they're not letting people in. That could be something that Saskia and Kynan now have to deal with. I don't find that very unlikely, so again, give it a 50-50, 51 plus. They've closed the gates. 60, they have shut down everything. So they have sealed themselves off from the outside and they have locked up their infected, visibly infected citizen in their houses. And the lumber industry is now shut down because rampaging beasts are in the forest, not letting anyone close, creating all sorts of economic problems for the city in the short and long term. What more? I think really all we just need now is to set a bit of a scene for Kynan and Saskia to walk into as they arrive in the vicinity of Red Crest, to give us an idea of the situation as it unfolds while they walk up to these closed gates. So we're gonna do action and theme here again. 71, refuse. 10, shelter. Refuse shelter. And we're talking about the situation that Kynan and Saskia walk in, so it's not them being affected, because of course the gates are closed, so they would also have to deal with this, but it seems that there are other people here that are being refused, or have been refused, shelter. Now we know there's a war on in the north, and we know that people are being displaced. My first thought is that refugees from towns that fell under the scrutiny of Vigo's war bands have now made it to Red Crest, but they're not being let in. They also have no other place to really go because there isn't much more south to be had in the Ironlands where Red Crest is. So it could be refugees. Is it refugees? Yes or no? Let's do a 51 plus. Yes, it's refugees. Yes, it's refugees. That's an 80. So we have a ragtag bunch of foot-weary, long-traveled souls, maybe with a couple of wagons, camped in front of Red Crest, perhaps for a couple of days now, as they have run out of options, but the Red Crestians are not willing to let them in. That's probably then the first people that Kynan and Saskia will encounter and immediately get a first impression of the situation as it is in Red Crest now, namely, you're not getting in. Now, at the risk of turning this into a dice rolling orgy, I need one more thing to determine, because as we run into those refugees, we will also very likely run into the person that will speak for them, their representative, that not necessarily their leader, but at least the first person that Kynan and Saskia engage with. So let's give ourselves a name and a few character traits and descriptors, but first a name. 27, I know what that is because that's Kynan. And the other option is Siora, so we're not really gonna go with either of those. 98, Bas or Caillou. I'm gonna go with Bas because it immediately gives me a mental image of the street fighting man. The question is it gonna be the Bas I'm picturing, or does the Oracle have other ideas? Let's give ourselves a few descriptors. 15, Bas is bold. Couldn't agree more. 48, Bas is kind. Okay, so Bas is bold and kind. What is he like? What's his character role? What is his trade, his occupation? 04, he's a healer. I slightly recalibrate my mental image here. Okay, a bold, kind healer with some character goals. What character goals do you have? 48, secure provisions. That fits very, very well. So that also tells us that this refugee caravan is ever so slightly under-provisioned at the moment. 97, roll twice. Jesus Christ, Bas has a lot of goals. Okay, let's give him another one. That's a 60, spread faith. He's a healer, spread faith, okay. I can work with that. And finally, 64, protect a person. Okay, I would say a certain image emerges of Bas. He is a religious priest-like figure who has gathered this band of scattered refugees out of various razed villages and battlefields and sworn to protect them and to secure them provisions. So he's leading them towards a settlement as far away as possible from the conflict to find them new shelter, find them a new place to live, secure their position and make sure that they have new lives to build for themselves. The bold part makes me think that he may be an aging former warrior who has sworn off that life and has seen one too many deaths on the battlefield, and that has turned him into a healer, because you also pick up some, well, unfortunate anatomic knowledge on battlefields if you spend too much time on them. So he's in my mind, he's a former soldier type who is atoning somewhat for his life of violence by being a healer, by being a protector, and this boldness still is there though. He's still an imposing figure. That was a lot of necessary building work. I think it's time to take a look at the fiction. By midday of the day that they arrive in Red Crest, Kynan and Saskia manage to ford the river separating the deep wilds from the area around the town at a suitably low point in the water flow, and they have still about an hour or two to go before they actually reach the outer lower perimeter of the town that extends itself across two layers along the edge of a steep hillside that has these red stone protrusions coming out of it, thereby giving the town its name. And as they draw closer, their initial impression is that perhaps the town may even have come under siege. But that initial impression fades as they are able to make out first details and they see the clearly not military assembly outside of the city's palisades. Because lined up close to the main entrance into the lower city, the main gate that is firmly shut, and flanked by two looming guard towers, there is something like a makeshift camp surrounded by wagons, arranged in a circle, far from fortified, but at least creating a bit of an inside and outside space. Smoke coming up from various fires, even a few lightly armed, not particularly armored men and women walking an outer perimeter every now and again, to at least not leave it completely unguarded, but it is very obviously a civilian affair, and a pretty miserable one at that, because the wagons look in pretty bad shape. The people don't look a lot better, they look underfed, a lot of them are injured. The younger component of the traveling troop has clearly seen combat and suffered for it. Some are missing limbs, some are still scarred or bandaged. And the well-trodden path along the river that leads up to the main gate leads Kynan and Saskia directly past that wagon fort. And they are spotted as they come upon the settlement. One of the outer perimeter guards that are circling the wagon fort disappears for a short, quite hurried moment. And by the time that Saskia and Kynan reach the wagon fort, a welcoming committee of sorts comes their way, led by a burly, broad-shouldered man, bald, with a crude symbol dedicated to the religious expression of the Pathfinder in the Ironlands around his neck. He's maybe in his late 40s, but he looks well put together, let's say. He's clearly strong. Something in his posture and in his guarded look in his eyes says that this is a man who is not to be trifled with. Carries himself like an experienced combatant, but there is a kindness in those eyes and in the broad smile that he greets Kynan and Saskia with. A smile is not exactly shared by the 4 perimeter guards that have now assembled behind him, carrying their crude weaponry, and they're eyeing Kynan and Saskia with more standoffish faces, because they are looking like trouble. To be perfectly fair, they are trouble. We take a little straw poll in Stonebridge and ask them how welcome they would be if they ever came back, so we're not able to fault them for it. However, the leader, the bald, sturdy, religious man, extends a friendly greeting. Welcome to our camp, fellow brother and sister of the road. I'm Brother Bas, and these are my companions. Unlike the citizenry that cowers behind their walls, me and mine are more welcoming to those whose bellies are empty and feet are weary. Saskia and Kynan exchange a look and get a read of the situation, looking past the group lined up in front of them now and getting a fairly distinct impression of a city that has closed itself off. I'm Kynan. This is Saskia. They've closed the gates. They have. There is talk of death and disease behind these walls. I am a healer, and yet they were too afraid to even let me in. Kynan glances to the side and sneers and mutters a low "fuck" under his breath. You have business in town? That's one way to put it. Do come and join us. There is nothing you can do but wait or move on until this runs its course. And with that, Bas turns around and the group that he was with parts and equally turns, and they leave a little bit of a gap between 2 of the wagons for Kynan and Saskia to walk into before they pull their little makeshift barricades close again. And inside the enclosure formed by the wagons, there is a bunch of tents that are sometimes just extensions of the wagons and sometimes is lined up around a central pyre, like a larger campfire. There are obviously still heavily injured and wounded people being cared for on some of the wagons, the covered, more sturdy ones. And overall there's a lot of just a smell of death and misery in the air. And while there's also children running around underfoot, most of the adults are just very stoic and resigned. Although they do put on a brave face whenever Bas gets close and he walks through this group of stranded people almost like a spotlight, and whoever he touches briefly brightens up a little bit. And I think we have a couple of options here of moves that we can possibly make, particularly after they've settled in a bit and got their own spot to drop their pack off and Bas is still hovering around assessing them. We can make a heal move, because Bas will spot that Kynan is still favoring one side when he walks and definitely looks like he caught a few blows. So let's do that. Yep, that gives us our health back. And the other move that comes to mind is, of course, gather information, because we also need to establish a few more things about this scenario. So the continued conversation while Bas is treating Kynan, we reflect with a gather information roll. That's a weak hit that gives us 1 momentum and means we uncover some information that complicates our quest or introduces a new danger. Let's maybe roll action and theme here. 61 capture. 48 debt. Capture, debt. I think I have an idea for this that also nicely ties in with the complication that we still have to resolve. And that is that as Kynan and Boss exchange their concerns about how long this might still take and what is it about this disease and this overall situation in the town, Boz reveals that he does have an occasional exchange with a brother in town. I'm imagining another follower of the tenet of the Pathfinder who will perhaps also occasionally lower some supplies down the palisade and who will be at least in contact with Boz, perhaps even on a daily basis, where they meet up with Boz outside and the brother up on top, giving him some information of what's going on in town and reassuring and perhaps even sharing a little bit of the limited supplies that they have. And this brother of his has shared with Boz that at least the culprit for the sickness has been found and captured, and that they expect the outbreak to stop because they blame witchcraft, they blame foul firstborn sorcery, which to my mind means they blame Asha. They blame the daughter for the sins that tie in a little bit with the sins of the mother, the perceived ones that got her kicked out, perhaps around the time when all of this first kicked off, when perhaps the first flarings of the conflict started, back then still in the forest, and that once this started up in town, they immediately turned their eye on Asha and suspect her of causing this, and they've captured her now. And I mean, we're too late. Have they killed her? Or I think that would invalidate our vow, so they haven't killed her, but are they about to execute her? Let's do a coin flip again. 51 plus, they are about to execute her very shortly. Yep. So Boss tells a story of this will all be over fairly soon and they'll open the gates again when it runs its course. They're about to burn the witch at the stake who unleashed this on them. And since it's a weak hit on the information gathering roll, I think this is the point where Kynan sort of turns to Saskia and out of the corner of his mouth goes, I have a bad feeling about this. Because they are both bound to their promise to Erin, and this whole witchery aspect and, you know, being accused of poisoning the well and things like that kind of ties in with the impression that at least Kynan got from Erin. And that probably tells Kynan that if he doesn't want to forfeit one of the few things he cares about, his vows, he better get a move on getting into that city. So after the wound treatment is done, Kynan and Saskia take a bit of a sidebar with Kynan in a low voice telling her, it sounds like we don't have much time. I have to get in there tonight. Why does it sound to me like you're trying to get rid of me? Don't be a fool. But I have my ways to gain entry, and it doesn't work if I have you tagging along. Well, as long as you promise to come back, you have my blessing. I figure we have a pretty decent chance to do this if we do it just with Kynan, just the way that he has so far not been able to operate, but in my mind used to operate. Because we have the Infiltrator path, and we have Spiritbound to help us securing advantages and gathering information. So I'm also thinking Kynan has this leverage now with Siora where he can employ her to perhaps scout ahead a little bit, or, you know, help him suss out where a good entry point is. So I think this is gonna be Kynan's little Mission Impossible scenario where he's gonna wait for nightfall and try and make it to the point where Asha is being held. And since that's quite a tall order and involves a lot of creeping about and making a bunch of moves, I'm afraid we're gonna have to do that next time. Not a lot of action in this particular episode, but at least we learned a lot and we now know what the threat is. We still need to find out what the disease is. But I'm pretty sure as quiet comparatively as this episode was, the next one's probably going to be pretty wild. So I'll catch you then. Thanks for watching and bye for now.